epic fantasy drama Outlander concluded its 5th season recently, which many say might be its best season yet. Well, I think it was. I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor of Gold Derby, and I'm here with star Caitriona Balfe. Caitriona, I'm going to cut to the chase. You were completely devastating in the harrowing season finale as Claire is kidnapped, repeatedly beaten and raped, and it was really, really hard to watch. And I'm wondering, given that I believe it was one of your best performances today, how did you feel how it turned out? Were you proud of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's strange material to sort of be proud of, but I know that we just worked really hard on trying to make it a really strong episode. I mean, you know, Jamie Payne, who was the director, was just such an amazing collaborator over this episode. We worked so hard on the script, trying to get it to, you know, trying to do something interesting and yet be super respectful to the subject matter, and be respectful to Claire as a character. Obviously, it's a very tough watch for people, but I think we found a way to highlight something that is not only maybe educational and in some way, I think, helpful, I hope, to people who have experienced trauma of that aspect, but I think also cinematically, I think we found a really interesting way to tell the story. And, you know, it was lovely to be a part of that process, both as an actor and sort of as a producer as well. I'm very proud of the episode, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to raise this later, but we might as well just kind of deal with it now, because the show gets criticised from time to time about how it deals with or portrays sexual violence. And I'm sure you're asked about this a lot. But if we turn that narrative around, I mean, we're dealing with a period in history where this was a really common thing that happened to women. And I think there are some positives to be taken out of the way the show tries to tackle those themes. What are your thoughts on how it does bring domestic and sexual violence to light?
Well, today, 1 in 6 women will either experience an attempted or a complete rape. Mm-hmm. So sexual violence is not only something that happened frequently back then, it happens with just a horrible frequency right now. And, you know, for us, yes, it is in the books and it's sort of part of the story of what happens. And, you know, I think you have a female writer who explores what are the consequences of sexual violence, what happens to people, how do they recover, how do families recover? And, you know, this is something that Diana returns to, but also we should be asking those questions. And for us, I mean, I understand some of the criticism and we hear it, but I think for us, we really try with each time that it happens to find something that we can explore that is going to put out something positive there. So in this instance, we really wanted to explore the idea of disassociation. And I think it was also so important to show that Claire sometimes gets lauded or held up as this strong female character. Yeah. And I wanted to show that this can happen to anybody, and also everyone responds in a different way, and the psychological coping mechanisms are different for every single person. And, you know, I do think that we found an interesting way to portray this. And, you know, we worked very hard. Jamie Payne worked so hard in terms of how you film it, about not giving any agency to the attackers and making this Claire's story and Claire's journey. And I do think it's unfortunate that it exists so prevalently in society, but as storytellers, we reflect that. And, you know, I think if you're going to have a conversation or if you're going to show sexual violence, then you need to take a point of view. And I think that that's something that we try to do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you do it quite authentically. And you touched on how the show attempted to portray how a lot of victims dissociate and distance themselves from the horrors that are being inflicted upon them. We entered that dreamscape Thanksgiving dinner in the 60s. Talk us through how that came about and what it was like to film those particular scenes in that house, and how beautifully it came across in the actual episode.
Yeah, I mean, Matt came up with this idea, which was really interesting, but it took a long time for us to get it right. You know, there was a danger that I think in earlier drafts that we got lost in this idea of like, oh, how cool it is to have all of the characters in the 60s. And for me, it was always so important to remember why we were doing it, that it was a psychological coping mechanism for Claire. And so originally we had a lot of dialogue for Claire, and I wanted to strip all of that back. And I wanted her, the only things for her to say during that time are no and Jamie, because I feel like that is the only thing that she is expressing that fits in both places. And, you know, we worked really closely. Again, Jamie Payne was amazing with coming up of a visual language. And, you know, we talked about different artists, and he mentioned, and he brought in a lot of imagery from Gregory Crewdson, who's this incredible photographer who everything is very surreal. And I think that that's what we wanted to keep. It's this idea of, this is a construct of Claire's mind, and she's trying to hold together this kind of safe space for herself, but the reality of what's happening keeps bleeding in, and you never want the audience to sort of just forget that the reason you're here is because something as horrible is happening somewhere else. And then shooting it was really, you know, it was really interesting. I mean, the set was incredible. You know, everyone else was sort of having this really fun day. You know, they were all in their 60s clothes, and everyone looked amazing. But for me, it was, you know, it was very much, I was kind of staying away and trying to stay in this very sensory place, because I feel like that's what it was, to try and keep this idea of a dream, or just this kind of not reality happening.
Yeah, it absolutely came across, because it was very otherworldly-like. But thinking more about the scenes in the 18th century when, you know, she's in that horrible situation, what strategies are you employing as a performer to prepare you for the physical and emotional toll that it must take on you day in, day out when you're actually performing those scenes?
You know, it's a multitude of things. You know, you do an awful lot of research, but also for me, it's really about, I use music a lot with work, you know, and finding music that brings you to a certain place in yourself and trying to stay there. You know, I think it was also, you know, such a credit to the guys, because they had such a horrible job to do. And Ned Dennehy is just such a wonderful actor and such a wonderful guy, playing such a horrible character. But, you know, with Outlander, I always feel that everything conspires to sort of help you, you know, whether it's the terrible weather or where we are, and you're really shooting in quite rough conditions, and everything just feels very real, I suppose, and because of that. You know, you're not really in a studio setting where they've created this dark place. You're like in a forest, you're lying in the wet, you're lying in the mud. And you know, I've been able to use all of that and just put it into your work is just so good. But it's weird. These kind of scenes, I think you just have to give yourself up to it and just allow the circumstances around to inform what you're doing. You know, I like to try and leave everything as organic and react as much just in the moment and as organically as I can, instead of planning everything out to the nth degree.
Yeah. I put out a call to your show's fans on Twitter the other day, and I received so many responses for like really interesting questions they might have. One in particular I really liked, and I know you've probably talked about this before, but Jiminy Stack wants to know how you became a producer on this season, and how did it come about, and how did it affect your ability to have more influence on the show?
How did it come about? Well, I've been chapping on that door for a little while. I think Sam and I are in quite a unique position. We've been on the show, and I've been on that set, you know, every single day pretty much since season one, a little less in the last two seasons. But, you become just so aware of everything that's going on. And, you know, it became apparent to me that there's certain places that I can be of benefit and I could really help out. And, you know, I've always been interested in producing and looking at the broader scope of a production. Maybe it's because I'm a busybody, you know. But you know, we sort of put in a request, and in prior seasons, I don't think they were ready for that. But you know, we had a renegotiation, and part of that was that we both wanted to be producers, and it takes a long time for these things to be worked out, and so it wasn't until this last season that happened. But we didn't really get the approval until right before shooting. So, you know, earlier on, I think we didn't have as much influence, but definitely towards the end of the season, in terms of really working the scripts, really, we were there, and we had a lot of new writers and a lot of new producers this season. And Matt and Marilyn, obviously the writer's room is in LA. So, you know, I think we were really helpful being on the ground and being able to sort of walk people who are kind of newer to the show through what's the core of our show, and really trying to retain the essence that we believe that we might have slightly lost a little in season 4.
Yeah. I mean, even when you weren't a producer, you're number one on the call sheet. And so that means that you are setting the tone on set. And I hear it a lot from lots of different performers who say X, Y, and Z is number one on the call sheet, really set the tone. How do you set the tone for someone who is one of the co-leads of this show?
Well, I think both Sam and I really have strived from the very beginning that we have a very friendly, open, respectful set. You know, every single person who comes onto that, no matter if it's a day player who has one line or, you know, somebody who's a supporting artist, an SA, everyone contributes. And unless every single person is working at their best, then none of us are. And, you know, I think we really try and make everybody as welcome as possible. And also just set the tone by showing up, being prepared, being on time. You know, there's no room for divas or big egos on our set. And I think we, you know, that's also a very British way of working. You know, a lot of British actors, no matter who they are, they do a bit of everything. You know, they're doing huge movies, but they're also doing radio, and it's really about the work. And that's what I love about shooting here. You know, there's no real, there's no stars throwing their weight around. You know, it's very much everyone gets all hands in on deck, and I love that about it.
So what about looking ahead? Vanessa, one of your other fans, wants to know whether you plan on directing any episodes coming up. Is that on the horizon for you?
I mean, I would love to. Again, that's a door I'm chipping on, so we'll see.
Fingers crossed. You know, you recently participated in an online discussion where you talked about the gender pay gap and how you renegotiated your contract quite early on. It's quite amazing that a show about a strong, modern, independent woman in an antiquated world, you were fighting for equal pay. I had no idea about this. Can you talk us through what was going on in the early days and how you were able to kind of fight for equal pay?
Well, I think it's more, I was a really unknown actress when I started, and, you know, there is a system that when you start, you come in at the ground level, and, you know, it's usually based on, had you tested for things before? Had you been on shows before? I'd never done TV. So, you know, that was the way the system was. I think it's changing. I think people are learning that, you know, that this doesn't quite fly in 2020 or whatever year we're in, but it's, you know, pay parity across the board. You know, it's not just actors. You have to look at, and what I am always interested in is, you know, you look at the crews and different departments in crews. Hair and makeup and costume, which are predominantly female-led departments, are paid far less than some of the more traditionally male-led departments. And, you know, it's, why does this happen? Why are we still having these fights? So, you know, I think it's something that's changing, and we all have to sort of keep trying to break those glass ceilings and get things changed.
Agreed. Another thing that occurred to me over the years that you've become more well known for your role in Outlander is your charity work and your ability to kind of use your platform as a well-known person to kind of fight for the, the underprivileged. Can you talk us through how much that's meant to you over the last couple of years as you've tried to make like a difference in that sphere?
Yeah, being part of this show, it's been one of the most incredible opportunities, I suppose, I've been given. When I was living in LA before I got the show, I used to volunteer locally and be part of different organizations, but I was never part of like a global charity that had a reach. And when I got Outlander, it was really something that was pushed by the fans because they were like, who can we donate in your honor? And this is such a concept for me because, I'd never been asked anything like that before. And, it was amazing that I was able to form this partnership with World Child Cancer, which are an incredible charity and they do the most amazing work across the world. And it's just been something that's been really amazing. It gets me to be able to pay my fortune forward. I'm part now of a community. I get to connect with the fans in a really special way. And they are so generous and so invested. And it's just been one of the real beauties of being in my position and being on a show like this.
Can we briefly talk about the flip side? Because I know Sam recently spoke out about the incessant bullying and negativity that happens online, and you understandably and promptly voiced your support for him defiantly, which is great to see, the two of you banding together like that. What's it like to deal with so much incessant negativity as a famous person on social media? I mean, what do you do? What do you employ? What strategies do you employ to deal with that?
Well, I would say that it's not incessant negativity. I do think it's a very small group of people. And, for the most part, you can ignore it. For the most part, it's, we all, I think, are our own worst enemies sometimes and read comments when we really shouldn't. I don't really need to know what other people think of me. The people who I know and love and who know me and love me, it's important what they think of me and they think I'm doing the right thing in my life. But strangers who make assumptions on things they really don't know about, it's not that important for me to know this. But inevitably at some point you come across it or you see it and it can be hurtful. And, I dealt with bullies when I was a kid. I didn't think I would have to deal with this again and, in my later years. But I think trying to keep it in perspective, trying to remember that it's a small faction of people and also just realizing that it's probably coming from a place of hurt for them, that this is something that, we are in public so that they're using us in some way to work out something that's actually very sad and very hurt within them. And if I try and approach it from that side, then I know it's really not about me. But it's when it affects, my husband or people in our lives, well, then you get a little bit like, so, occasionally you might zip back, but I try to not.
Yeah, and just have the self-control that is required. So much about the show, we've spoke about this before, is the interaction between you and co-star Sam. You've both really developed such a great working relationship, and we see it over the screen. You've implied this as well, that in the last season or two, the show has moved a little bit away from the two of you as, the central part of the show as we bring in new characters, which has been great, but it's been so lovely to see more of Jamie and Claire this season. And I'm just wondering, for you, what is the highlight about working with Sam as an actor and as your co-star? What does he bring to this dynamic that you really love?
I mean, I could just slag him off here. It's been such an amazing thing. We clicked instantly, and for whatever reason, he and I we're very different people. But we have a similarity in sort of how we approach certain things in our lives. And definitely how we approach work is both different and very similar. But he gives himself up 100% to Jamie, and he commits, just 100%. And I think, in that regard, we both love to work in that way. Like, he goes for everything just 100%, and he's always just so prepared and committed. And I always know that he has my back as an actor, as a character. I always know that if we're going to do a scene, you're never going to have to question Sam's commitment or his honesty or his truthfulness. And that's something great. I mean, to never have to worry about that ever as an actor. I mean, I know so many actors who were in shows with other people and they didn't get along, and I just can't even imagine what that must feel like. And he's just, I think what he brings is just his heart, and he's got such a big heart as Sam, and obviously Jamie. That's why we all love him so much, is that purity of heart, I suppose.
That's nice. Final question, Claire, about Claire, is she's a strong woman. We love her for her spirited nature. She's smart, she's intelligent. There's so much about Claire that we love. Where does she go to from here, in your mind? You're going to obviously play her in season 6. We know what the book says, but have you already started to think about where she could possibly go to from such a horrible low?
Well, yeah, and I think the psychology of someone like Claire, who, and I think it really brings us back to that speech at the end where she was like, I'm supposed to be broken by this. I think that that's such an interesting thing to explore, is somebody who has always prided themselves on being so strong. How do they cope with pain and vulnerability and the idea that they don't quite know how to get through this? And, I do think that Claire can sometimes suffer from an inability to accept her own weakness, and weakness as in her vulnerability or her pain or her sort of not being okay. And I think that gives me something really interesting to work with, because I think that Claire doesn't always consciously know what's going on within her, that it has to come out in other ways for her to actually understand it. That's actually, I think, going to be really rich material, at least for me to kind of get my head around.
Yeah, we are so looking forward to that. And Caitriona, congratulations on a really strong season 5. Your performance as Claire was pretty amazing, and we have so much more to look forward to watching you and your co-star Sam on our television screens.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being so supportive as well.
Now, everyone go to Gold Derby, make your predictions, maybe for Outlander if you want. And while you're here, click subscribe. We have lots of contender chats, just like this one with Caitriona.